They say we live for pleasure. But what if pleasure is what's quietly undoing us? What if the dopamine hit, the late-night scroll, the binge, the flirtation aren't rewards, but distractions in disguise, numbing rituals we mistake for living? Let me ask you something. When was the last time you felt peace? Not because you achieved something, not because you escaped, but simply because nothing was missing. In a world addicted to stimulation, we're drowning in comfort, but starving for connection with ourselves. Carl Jung warned us, when the outer world is too loud, it's often because the inner world has been ignored. And today, right here on Psychology Insights, we're going to peel back the mask of pleasure and reveal the shadow it's been hiding. This might just change the way you live. Let's begin. Imagine this for a moment. You wake up and, without even thinking, your hand reaches for your phone. There's no emergency, no message that needs your urgent attention. But somehow, the need to check, to scroll, to stimulate your brain, it's louder than your hunger. One video makes you chuckle. Another gives you a second of delight. And just like that, an hour disappears into the void of endless content. Yet the emptiness inside you, it remains untouched. You put the phone down and wander toward the kitchen. Maybe you grab something sweet or salty or both, not because you're truly hungry, but because you're chasing a feeling you can't quite name. And then the guilt creeps in. You weren't feeding your body, you were feeding your ache. But what was it really? It wasn't hunger. It wasn't even boredom. It was silent. It was a moment of stillness you've been taught to run from. It was the invisible scream of a part of you that's gone unheard for too long. Carl Jung called this unseen part of ourselves the shadow, the hidden emotional world we bury beneath our daily distractions. He said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And in our modern world, pleasure has become the most seductive way to avoid ourselves. Think about it. When was the last time you reached for a snack, opened a tab, or messaged someone, not out of joy, but out of discomfort? Jung believed that when we indulge in pleasure not for nourishment, connection, or celebration, but as an escape, we're not actually choosing happiness. We're choosing anesthesia. We're numbing the signal instead of listening to the message. And here's the hard truth you may not want to hear. Most of what we call pleasure today is actually just relief from self-awareness. It's not joy. It's a break from the parts of ourselves we don't want to face. But the cost, it's heavy. Because every moment we run from real presence, we deepen the hunger for something real. And when we don't find it, we start to believe we're broken. But we're not. We've just been conditioned to mistake escape for enjoyment. We've been taught that being entertained is the same as being fulfilled. But what if it's not? What if every craving is actually a call, not for more, but for less? Less noise, less numbing, less running. Now let me take you back. Not just years, but decades. Picture yourself at 6 years old. You're crying. No one notices. No one comes. So, you learn. Feeling bad gets you nowhere. But when you smile, when you hide your pain, when you distract yourself, suddenly people approve. And that becomes your pattern. It gets rewarded, so it gets repeated. Again and again. Until one day, you're an adult with unspoken wounds and pleasures that are louder than your truth, louder than your loneliness, louder than your fear, louder than the child inside you who never stopped needing love, just learned to hide it. So let me ask you, what are you really reaching for when you reach for pleasure? Is it joy, or is it just silence in disguise? Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever done something that was supposed to bring you joy, only to feel strangely empty afterward? Like you watched that extra episode, scrolled a bit longer than you meant to, or ate that dessert you weren't hungry for, and instead of feeling satisfied, you felt disconnected from yourself? If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. And here's why that happens, not just psychologically, but neurologically. Carl Jung understood something most people still miss today. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Pleasure isn't the enemy, but when it's used as a shield, as a numbing agent, as a way to silence the parts of us we haven't healed, it becomes a trap, a beautiful, seductive, socially acceptable form of self-abandonment. You see, pleasure has memory. Every time you use it to escape pain, you reinforce the belief that stillness is unsafe, that silence is punishment, that presence is unbearable. That's why you can't sit in a quiet room without reaching for your phone. That's why you need music in the shower. That's why you feel anxious when you're not being stimulated. You've been conditioned, not by accident, but through years of tiny, unconscious lessons, to run from your own inner world. Think back with me. You're a child. You fall and scrape your knee. It hurts. You cry. And someone says, "Don't cry, here's a cookie." Or, "Look, a cartoon's on, cheer up." What did you learn? You didn't just learn to stop crying. You learned that discomfort should be avoided, not felt. That pleasure is the solution to pain. And your brain, always trying to protect you, remembers that shortcut. So now, decades later, you're still reaching for comfort whenever something stings. Not because you're weak, but because your nervous system was wired to believe that stillness equals danger. Jung warned us of this pattern. He said, when the inner world is ignored, the outer world becomes louder. And look around. What's louder than pleasure today? The scroll, the buzz, the dopamine, the quick fix. They scream, not because they're bad, but because they've become the default. And every time you choose them without intention, you step further away from the part of you that's quietly asking to be seen, to be felt, to be healed. Let's take it deeper. Real pleasure, the kind that nourishes your soul, doesn't scream. It whispers. It's the peace you feel after finishing something you once feared. It's the stillness after choosing integrity over comfort. It's the quiet joy of waking up and realizing you no longer need what once controlled you. But that kind of pleasure isn't addictive, which is why we rarely crave it. It doesn't distract, it expands. And yet, it's the only kind worth craving. Most people don't realize this, because we've all been taught to confuse relief with joy. But relief fades. True joy remains. So let me ask you again. Have you ever felt guilty after pleasure? After that impulse buy? Or that conversation you knew was driven by loneliness, not love? That guilt isn't punishment. It's your soul's way of saying, you missed the mark. You fed the craving, but not the need. That's not weakness. That's awareness. And awareness is where healing begins. This is what shadow work truly is. It's not about becoming darker. It's not about being edgy or mysterious. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you've exiled. It's about looking directly at the moment you choose distraction over truth and saying, I see what I'm doing, and I'm ready to choose differently. Because you don't need to numb your life to survive it. You need to feel it, to transform it. And if this message resonates with you, I invite you, not just to reflect, but to respond. Share the moment that hit you hardest. Let's stop pretending we're alone in this. Let's stop chasing mirages. Because as Jung would say, who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. So, what part of you is ready to wake up? Let me tell you a story, not just about one person, but about a pattern that lives in so many of us. There was someone who couldn't stop falling into intense, whirlwind relationships. They said, I'm just a hopeless romantic, and they believed it. But if you looked closer, every relationship followed the same cycle. Obsession, emotional highs, inevitable crashes, and then the chase started all over again. When asked why they kept doing it, they said, because I love you. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was harder to face. What they really loved was distraction, because being alone meant facing silence. And in that silence, the echoes of wounds they never learned to name would rise. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And that's exactly what was happening. They weren't choosing love. They were escaping themselves. Pleasure became the plaster they used to patch over old pain. But as with all things unhealed, the cracks eventually showed. Now let me ask you, have you ever chased something, not because it gave you meaning, but because it saved you from feeling. A relationship, a scroll, a drink, a purchase, a text. You see, this isn't just one story. It's a mirror, a reflection of how millions of us learn to cope. We confuse longing with love, distraction with joy, numbing with healing. And the real danger isn't that these pleasures exist. It's that we rarely stop to question why we need them so badly. Jung didn't say pleasure was evil. In fact, he believed deeply in the soul's capacity for joy. But he also warned that when we use pleasure to avoid discomfort, we turn a tool into a drug, and that drug slowly erodes the self. Let's break a myth together. Pleasure is not healing. It's not peace. It's not self-worth. Pleasure is a tool, and like any tool, its power depends on how you use it. When it's wielded unconsciously, it can become a cage. But when it's chosen with clarity, it becomes a celebration. Think back to the last time you delayed gratification. You didn't send that text. You didn't click that link. You paused. You waited. And later, didn't you feel something deeper than just satisfaction? Maybe it was peace. Maybe it was pride. That's because discipline isn't about denial. It's about self-trust. And self-trust is a deeper pleasure, the kind that stays. Because once you trust yourself to sit with discomfort, to feel your feelings instead of fleeing them, you take back your power. You no longer reach for pleasure to escape. You reach for it to celebrate. And that's when something magical happens. Pleasure stops being a crutch and becomes a choice. Not something that controls you, but something you get to fully enjoy, without shame, without guilt, without addiction. So, let me leave you with this question. What if the pleasure you're chasing is actually the peace you've been avoiding? Now close your eyes and picture this. You walk into a room, no phone buzzing, no background music, no screen glowing, just silence, just you. And instead of panic, instead of the urge to reach for something to fill the space, you feel peace, not because you finally have everything you've ever wanted, but because, in that moment, you are everything you need. That's what Carl Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, the journey of becoming whole, not by chasing achievement or constantly fixing yourself, but by integrating the parts of you you've abandoned along the way. He said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And to become that version of yourself, you must first learn how to be with yourself, not as a punishment, but as a return home." You see, we've been taught that pleasure is the path to happiness, that the more we indulge, the more alive we'll feel. But what if that's the biggest lie of all? Because real pleasure, the kind that fills rather than empties, doesn't scream for your attention. It doesn't flood your system with noise. It whispers. It shows up in quiet victories, in deep connection, in the moment you pause instead of react. Think about the last time you reached for your phone when you weren't even expecting a message. The last time you scrolled through videos just to silence the ache. Or the last time you ate. Not because you were hungry, but because your emotions felt unbearable. What were you really trying to feed? Was it your body or your sense of safety? Jung warned us that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And in this age of infinite stimulation, we've mastered the art of avoidance. But the question is, what are we avoiding? Often, it's the wound we never named, the loneliness we were told to cover up, the sadness that was never validated. And so, we reach for sugar, for sex, for scrolling, for status, not to celebrate life, but to escape it. And the most dangerous part? We call it self-care. We say, I deserve this. But pleasure without presence isn't care. It's sedation. It's building a beautiful carnival outside your emotional home while the child inside waits in the dark. Let me ask you something. What if the silence you fear is actually your soul trying to speak? What if the ache beneath your pleasures is the part of you asking to be seen, not soothed? This is what real healing demands. The courage to walk through that silence, to sit in the discomfort, and to say, I'm here now. You can speak. That's the essence of Jung's shadow work. Not to become someone darker, but to become someone deeper. Not to chase more pleasure, but to reclaim the power that comes from no longer needing it. And that's where freedom begins. Not in doing whatever you want, but in realizing you no longer need to. True pleasure doesn't control you. It doesn't hook you with urgency. It doesn't whisper lies like, just 5 more minutes. It waits for you to arrive. And when you do, you laugh slower. You speak with intention. You no longer feel the pressure to respond instantly or entertain constantly. People will notice. They'll ask what's changed. And the truth is, you have. Because once you stop using pleasure to escape yourself, you finally meet the self you've been searching for all along. That's what scares the world. A person who is no longer seduced by distraction, who can sit in stillness and remain whole, is powerful beyond measure. They can't be manipulated by ads, by fear, by temporary highs, because their presence has returned. And presence, deep, embodied, sovereign presence, is the purest form of rebellion in a world addicted to escape. So I ask you, what would it look like for you to come home to yourself? Not tomorrow, not when you've earned it, but right now. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But let me ask you, do you actually know who that is? Because I can promise you this, who you truly are is not a slave to dopamine. You are not just a bundle of cravings waiting to be fed. You are not here to endlessly consume, not feelings, not validation, not stimulation. You are here to create meaning. And here's the truth most people never say out loud. Meaning doesn't always feel good. It isn't always pleasurable. In fact, the things that matter most, the things that shape you, stretch you, and connect you to your deepest self, often come wrapped in discomfort. Meaning demands your effort. It demands your presence. It asks you to feel things you'd rather avoid. It's not always convenient, and it won't always give you a rush. But unlike temporary pleasure, it will feed you in a way that lasts. So the next time that craving shows up, that urge to scroll, to snack, to text, to escape, I want you to try something radical. Pause, not to suppress the craving, not to shame yourself, but to get curious. Ask yourself, what do I truly need right now? Not what would feel good for 5 minutes, but what would feel right for my soul. Because that question, asked honestly, has the power to change your life. That single moment of self-awareness breaks the cycle. It interrupts the loop, and it hands you the pen. You stop being the victim of your impulses and start becoming the author of your experience. And when you realize that, when you truly see that you are not your hunger, but the one who decides how to feed it, you step into your power. You remember that you are not here to chase fleeting highs. You're here to become whole. So as we close, remember this. You'll never look at pleasure the same again, not because it's wrong, but because now you understand its deeper role in your life. This video wasn't about rejecting joy, but about reclaiming it, choosing presence over escape, and meaning over impulse. You'll still laugh, love, and savor life's sweetness, but you'll do it with clarity. And that clarity will protect your peace, elevate your habits, and make every moment of joy feel more sacred, not more scarce. So let me ask you, what's one pleasure you're ready to stop chasing and start experiencing with intention? Drop it in the comments below. I'd love to hear what spoke to you most. If this message resonated, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it. On Psychology Insights, we're not here to numb life. We're here to live it fully, consciously, and courageously.